The wind cut like a knife across Charles Aldridge's face as he huddled beside the ornate iron gates of his own mansion. A beggar's rags clung to his lean frame, stained with sweat and street dust, so different from the tailored suits he once wore with pride. The night air reeked of wet asphalt and secrets. Every gust of wind carried the scent of betrayal. He shifted uncomfortably on the damp sidewalk, the cracked tin cup in his trembling hands. A luxury sedan purred by, its tinted, windows concealing a world he used to own. The headlights threw his gaunt features into harsh relief, exposing every line of worry and every shadow of pain that had gathered in his face. Once, Charles Aldridge's name had been synonymous with success. CEO of Aldridge Ventures, a man whose signature alone had sealed million-dollar deals. But tonight he was nothing but a ragged man on the curb, a beggar in front of his own gates. It was by design. Every detail of his disguise, every torn thread, every smudge of dirt under his fingernails had been planned. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes, to know who his enemies were and who had orchestrated the betrayal that had nearly cost him everything. He'd chosen the spot carefully. The gates were tall, black iron, ornate with gilded vines that twisted like lies. They marked the entrance to his sanctuary, now invaded by wolves in sheep's clothing. Through those gates lay the heart of the mansion, a place he'd built, from nothing but sweat and sleepless nights. Now, it buzzed with laughter and music, a party he'd planned but never intended to attend. Inside, they were celebrating without him. His brother Daniel, his ex-wife Victoria, and a dozen others who had fed off his generosity like parasites. Charles gritted his teeth. Victoria had once whispered promises into his ear, swearing loyalty. Daniel had once called him brother, with a hand on his shoulder and eyes full of fake respect. How quickly the masks had fallen when the money started to disappear. A group of party-goers approached the gate, their laughter sharp as broken glass. They stumbled in designer clothes, carrying half-empty wine bottles and secrets they thought Charles would never know. "Spare some change," Charles rasped, lowering his eyes. His voice cracked from hours of practice, weak, defeated, nothing like the commanding tone he'd once used to command boardrooms. One of the women, blonde hair, piled high like a queen's crown, recoiled. "Oh my God, he's disgusting. Let's go inside." She clutched her boyfriend's arm, her diamond bracelet catching the light. He didn't even glance at Charles as they slipped through the gates and disappeared into the mansion's glow. Charles let the humiliation wash over him. Each sneer, each averted gaze, each silent judgment, they were all fuel. Every cold look reminded him why he'd chosen to do this. He wasn't just seeking answers. He was seeking revenge. He remembered the night everything had started to unravel. It was 2 months ago, in his own study. He'd come home early, tired and needing to escape the endless boardroom fights. The door had been ajar, the light spilling, out like a confession. Inside, Victoria had sat on the edge of his mahogany desk, her legs crossed, her smile wicked. Daniel stood too close to her, a conspiratorial gleam in his eyes. They'd stopped talking the moment Charles had stepped in, but the silence had screamed louder than words. After that, the missing funds, the secret meetings, the calls that ended. When he entered the room, it hadn't taken long for the dots to connect. Daniel, his own brother, was draining the company accounts with Victoria's help. His empire crumbled under their betrayal. Investors pulled out. Contracts vanished. Charles had watched helplessly as his life's work disintegrated, until tonight. Tonight, they'd think he was gone. They'd think he was a ruined man, left to beg on the streets. But Charles had one advantage they'd never expect. He was here, watching. A car door slammed. Charles's head snapped up. Another figure emerged from the shadows, a young man, maybe in his 20s, hood pulled low, jeans ripped at the knees. He swaggered toward the gate, pausing to glance at Charles. "Got any spare change?" Charles croaked, holding out the tin cup. The kid smirked. Man, you look like you crawled out of a trash can. He tossed a crumpled dollar bill into a cup. Don't spend it all in one place. He walked off, whistling, leaving Charles clutching the single dollar like a lifeline. A lifeline? No, a thread. Every insult, every small kindness, every betrayal, it all wove into a tapestry of truth. Charles had to know who was loyal and who was not, who had conspired against him and who had stood silent. He peered through the gates. From this angle, he could see the grand hall lit by 1,000 candles and chandeliers. Laughter floated through the night air, sweet and poisonous. He could see Daniel, his tailored suit immaculate, a glass of whiskey in one hand, the other, gesturing as he charmed a group of investors. Victoria stood nearby, her red dress hugging her curves, her smile as sharp as a knife. She leaned in close to Daniel, her hand brushing his chest in a gesture that once belonged to Charles alone. A sharp pain twisted in his gut. He remembered the promises, late-night whispers, plans for a family, a future. He remembered Daniel's grin as he handed him the keys to the company's success, and now here they were, celebrating his downfall. He'd be damned if he let them get away with it. Suddenly, the front door burst open. A man stumbled out, short, balding, his face pale as paper. His shirt was torn, blood seeping through his fingers as he clutched his side. Charles's heart stopped. "Help!" the man gasped. "Somebody, please!" He collapsed on the marble steps, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Inside, a scream shattered the air, Victoria's voice high-pitched and terrified. "Call an ambulance! Oh my God, he's dying!" Charles's mind raced. What had happened? Who had done this? He started to rise, but a hand landed on his shoulder, shoving him back down. "Stay down, old man," a gruff voice growled. A security guard, someone Charles didn't recognize. Probably hired by Daniel, he thought bitterly. Through the open door, Daniel appeared, his face pale and strained. His eyes darted around, wild, desperate. He spotted Charles crouched by the gate, but in the chaos, he didn't seem to recognize him. It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Daniel stammered, voice breaking. He came at me. I didn't mean to." Charles's blood turned to ice. Daniel had blood on his hands, literally, a betrayal of brotherhood that went deeper than stolen money. The ambulance wailed in the distance. Blue lights danced. Across the mansion's perfect white walls, Charles's vision blurred with rage and grief. He had come here to witness betrayal. But he hadn't expected murder. A trembling voice whispered through the night air, a voice that once called him Charlie with so much love. "Daniel, what have you done?" Victoria's silhouette loomed in the doorway, her red dress now stained with blood. Her eyes were wide, horror-struck, as she stared at her hands. "What have you done?" Daniel turned on her. "Don't you dare judge me. His voice cracked, splintering with rage. "You were part of this too." Victoria shrank back, her hands trembling. I didn't." She collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Charles's heart slammed in his chest. Everything he'd built, everything he'd trusted, was crumbling in front of him. He gripped the tin cup so tightly it bent in his hand. Tonight was supposed to be the night he exposed them. Tonight was supposed to be about survival, but now it was so much more. Daniel's gaze flicked over the yard, landing on the gate. For a split second, their eyes met, and Charles saw something in his brother's face he'd never seen before. Fear. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but the paramedics arrived, cutting through the chaos with their shouts and gurney wheels. Daniel vanished inside the mansion, swallowed by shadows. Charles stayed crouched in the dirt, heart hammering. He'd wanted the truth. Now he had it. But the price was blood. A single thought pulsed in his mind, louder than the sirens. This was only the beginning, and he wouldn't stop until he uncovered everything. The flashing blue and red lights cast eerie shadows over the front lawn as the paramedics rushed the injured man into the waiting ambulance. Charles stayed crouched near the gate, every muscle tense, every nerve screaming. His heart pounded with a mix of fury and confusion. The night had shattered into chaos, and he felt more helpless than ever, trapped behind this gate, disguised as a beggar, powerless but to watch. Daniel Aldridge's betrayal had turned violent. But why? And who was the man bleeding on the steps? Charles's mind raced as he watched the ambulance speed away. The mansion's grand doors closed slowly behind. The paramedics, locking the dark secrets inside. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and stood shakily, the tin cup clutched in his hand now useless. There was no turning back. He had to find answers. Charles limped away from the gate and into the shadows of the street. The mansion glowed. Behind him, like a beacon of lies, while his ragged clothes dragged dirt and despair across the cracked pavement. He ducked into a narrow alley, his breathing heavy but steady. He couldn't stay here, not in the open. His phone buzzed once in his torn pocket, a number he didn't recognize. Ignoring it, he kept walking. He needed a plan, to gather allies, to learn who he could trust. But who could he trust now? 2 months ago, his company had been his kingdom. Now, it was a battlefield littered with backstabbing vultures. The next morning, dawn was grey and unforgiving. Charles sat on a park bench, still in his disguise, watching the city wake up around him. People passed by in a blur. Some avoided him, others gave reluctant glances. A few dropped coins into his cup without a word. He forced himself to focus on the bigger picture. Daniel's violent attack was no random crime. It was a message, a warning to stay away. But Charles knew better. He had to dig deeper. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. "You're Charles Aldridge, aren't you?" Charles froze. The voice was low but certain. He looked up to see a woman in her late 30s, wearing a worn leather jacket and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. "How do you know that?" Charles asked cautiously. "I've been following the story," she said. "You're a fall from grace, the company chaos, the rumors about your brother. My name's Anna. I'm a private investigator." Charles studied her for a moment, weighing the risk. Could he trust her? "Why help me?" he asked. Anna's eyes hardened. "Because I don't believe the official story. Something about your accident doesn't add up. And I think you're the only one who can expose it." For the first time that day, Charles felt a flicker of hope. "Okay," he said, "but this has to be quiet. I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. If Daniel or Victoria find out I'm still around—" Anna nodded. "We'll be careful." Back at the mansion, the atmosphere was different. The night's violence had cracked the perfect facade. Daniel looked exhausted, haunted. Victoria's tears had dried, replaced by a cold mask of control. In the boardroom, Daniel paced, muttering under his breath. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. He's a problem. We need to finish this." Victoria watched him silently, her fingers tapping nervously on the mahogany table. She was trapped in a web of lies, and the walls were closing in fast. Meanwhile, Charles and Anna sat in a small cafe, going over the pieces of the puzzle. "Who was the man Daniel attacked?" Charles asked. Anna hesitated. "His name is Mark Thompson. He worked for your company, but not in the way you think. He was an informant, someone Daniel feared would expose him." Charles clenched his fists. "So Daniel's been trying to silence anyone who threatens him?" Anna nodded grimly. "Exactly. And I think he's planning something bigger, something to take down the rest of your empire." Charles' mind flashed back to the night of the attack, the way Daniel looked scared when their eyes met. "He's desperate," Charles said quietly. "And dangerous." Anna reached across the table. "We need proof. Documents, emails, anything that ties Daniel and Victoria to the theft and violence." Charles swallowed hard. "I'll need to get back inside the mansion." Anna's gaze was sharp. "And how do you plan to do that? As a beggar?" Charles looked down at his ragged clothes. "I won't be a beggar forever." That night, Charles returned to the mansion, but this time he stayed in the shadows, watching. The party was over. The guests had gone. The mansion was silent except for the soft murmur of voices behind closed doors. Through a window, he spotted Daniel talking on the phone, his face tight with tension. "I want the papers moved by morning," Daniel hissed into the receiver. "No mistakes. This has to disappear." Charles's heart raced. This was his chance. He slipped closer, scanning the windows, looking for a way inside. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind him. He spun around. A figure stood in the shadows. "Anna, you're reckless," she whispered, "but I admire it." Together, they moved quietly toward a side door. Unlocked. Inside, the mansion smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. Charles's footsteps were careful but determined. He moved toward the study, the heart of his empire, now a fortress of secrets. In the dim light, papers and files were strewn across the desk. A laptop glowed softly, unattended. Anna pulled out a small flashlight, illuminating the screen. "There," she said. "Emails between Daniel and unknown accounts. They're siphoning money out of your company." Charles scanned the emails. There were transactions, coded messages, names he didn't recognize. But one email stood out, sent just days ago. It mentioned a location, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. "This is where Daniel is hiding the rest of the stolen funds," Anna said. "If we get there first, we can stop him." Charles nodded. "We need to move fast." Suddenly, a noise behind them, a door creaking open. "Get down!" Anna hissed. They ducked behind the heavy velvet curtains. Just as footsteps entered the study, Daniel stepped in, eyes scanning the room. "Charles," he muttered, voice sharp. "I know you're here." Charles's blood ran cold. How could Daniel be so sure? The footsteps stopped near the desk. Daniel picked up the laptop, staring at the screen. Anna squeezed Charles's arm. "We have to leave, now." But Daniel's voice echoed from the doorway. "You think you can play me for a fool?" The curtain flicked. Daniel's gaze locked on Charles's shadow. Charles felt the world tilt. Outside, the night held its breath. Charles had started this journey as a beggar in front of his mansion, desperate for answers. Now he was on the edge of a deadly game, one where every move could cost him everything. But Charles wasn't done yet. He had to survive, to fight, to reclaim what was rightfully his, because sometimes the greatest power comes from the most unexpected places. Charles's breath caught in his throat as Daniel's sharp voice pierced the tense silence. The dim light in the study flickered, casting long shadows across the room. "You think you can just sneak in and steal from me?" Daniel snarled, stepping forward with slow, menacing steps. Charles stayed frozen behind the heavy velvet curtains, heart hammering. He could feel Anna's hand gripping his arm, trembling but firm. For a moment the world seemed to narrow to the space between them, the enemy and the betrayed. "I'm not here to steal," Charles finally said, his voice low but steady. "I'm here to take back what's mine." Daniel laughed bitterly, a sound void of humor. "Yours? You've been dead to this company since the day you disappeared. You think this empire was built on your goodwill?" Charles took a cautious step out from the shadows. The torn clothes hung loosely on his frame, but inside he was burning with a fierce determination. "Your lies, your greed have poisoned everything," he said. "And you're going to pay." Daniel's eyes darkened. "You're crazy." "But that won't save you." Before Charles could react, Daniel lunged toward the desk, grabbing a small silver pistol from the drawer. Anna gasped. "Daniel!" Charles warned, stepping forward despite the danger. Daniel's hand trembled as he aimed, rage overtaking reason. Suddenly the study door slammed open. Heavy footsteps thudded behind it. Victoria burst in, face pale, but eyes sharp. "Put the gun down, Daniel," she commanded, voice cold but cracking beneath the surface. Daniel hesitated, then lowered the weapon, breathing hard. Victoria's gaze shifted to Charles, surprised but calculating. "Charles," she said, "I didn't expect to see you alive." Charles ignored her, focusing on the moment. "What do you want, Victoria?" Still playing the part of the innocent queen, she stepped closer, voice low. "We both want the company to survive, but you've been gone too long, and you don't know what you're up against." Anna's eyes narrowed. "What is that supposed to mean?" Victoria hesitated, then glanced at Daniel, who avoided her gaze. "There are things you don't understand," Victoria said. "Things darker than you imagine." Charles's mind reeled. Was this more than just a family feud? Was something deeper, more dangerous lurking beneath the surface? Victoria took a deep breath. There's someone else, someone pulling the strings behind the scenes. Charles's heart sank. "Who?" he demanded. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know his name, but he's the reason Daniel turned violent, the reason your company is bleeding money." Anna looked skeptical. "How do you know this?" Victoria swallowed hard. "Because I saw it. I heard conversations. I was part of it at first, but I wanted out. I wanted to protect you." Charles stared at her, trying to read the truth behind her words. "Why tell me now?" he asked. "Because it's too late to hide," Victoria said quietly. "They're coming for all of us." Suddenly the mansion's alarm blared. Red lights, flashing urgently. Daniel cursed under his breath. "They found us!" Charles's blood ran cold. "Who?" Before anyone could answer, the study windows shattered and masked men stormed in. Gunshots rang out. Charles dove behind the desk, Anna pulling him down. Victoria grabbed Daniel's arm. "We have to run!" They scrambled toward the back door. Chaos swallowing the room. Charles's mind raced. This was no longer just a battle for a company. It was a fight for survival. They burst into the night, running through the gardens, hearts pounding, shadows chasing them. Behind them, the mansion burned with betrayal. But Charles wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. Charles's lungs burned. As he sprinted through the dark maze of the garden, Anna close beside him, clutching his arm like a lifeline. Behind them, the piercing sound of sirens and shouts grew louder, mixing with the crackling fire that devoured the mansion's wooden beams. They burst through the wrought iron gate and onto the deserted street beyond. The cold night air bit into their skin, but there was no time to stop. "We can't go back there," Anna whispered, her voice shaking. "They want us dead." Charles nodded, wiping sweat and grime from his face. His mind was a storm of questions and fears. Who were those men? What did Victoria mean by someone pulling strings? And above all, how deep did this conspiracy go? "We need help," Charles said, scanning the shadows. Anna tugged him toward a small diner, still open under a flickering neon sign. They slipped inside. Hearts pounding, eyes scanning for threats. The diner was nearly empty. A tired waitress with kind eyes approached cautiously. "Can I help you folks?" she asked. Charles swallowed hard. "We need a place to hide for a while." "Safe. Can you help?" The waitress hesitated, then nodded. "I know a few people, maybe. Sit down, I'll see what I can do." As they settled into a corner booth, Charles's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, but answered. A distorted voice hissed, "You think you're safe now. You have no idea what's coming." Then the line went dead. Anna's hand tightened on his. "We're in deeper than we thought," Charles said grimly. The waitress returned with a steaming pot of coffee. "My name's Rosa," she said softly. "You're not the first rich person to come here running from trouble. But it's not just money at stake. There's something bigger, darker." Charles studied her. "What do you mean?" Rosa glanced around before leaning in. "There's a group, shadowy and powerful. They manipulate everything, businesses, politics, even police. They don't want the truth to come out." Anna swallowed hard. "And Victoria, Daniel, are they part of it?" Rosa shook her head. No one is safe. People get bought, blackmailed, or worse. You have to be careful who you trust. Charles looked at Anna, determination settling like steel in his chest. We need to find out who's behind this and stop them. Rosa nodded. I can connect you with someone who knows, but it won't be easy. Suddenly, the diner's door slammed open. A tall man in a leather jacket strode inside, scanning the room with sharp eyes. Rosa's face paled. They're here, she whispered. Charles stood, heart racing. The man locked eyes with Charles. You don't belong here, he said, voice low and dangerous. Charles's hand moved instinctively to the pocket where he kept the small pistol he'd taken from Daniel's desk. Before things escalated, Rosa stepped forward. Wait, she said. He's with me. The man's eyes flickered. Rosa continued. If you want to find the truth, you need to come with me. Now. Charles looked at Anna, who nodded silently. They had no choice. Outside, the cold night wrapped around them like a shroud. Rosa led them to a battered old van parked in a dark alley. Inside, the man introduced himself as Marcus, a former insider turned whistleblower. He spoke in hushed tones. There's a secret cabal controlling everything. They've destroyed anyone who gets in their way. Charles listened, the weight of the conspiracy settling over him like a storm. We have evidence, Marcus said, but it's hidden, locked away where no one can find it. Charles's mind raced. This is bigger than a family feud, he said. Marcus nodded grimly. And they know you're coming. The van's engine roared as they sped into the night. Behind them, the city lights blurred. Ahead, the dangerous path toward the truth. But Charles knew one thing for sure. Whatever it took, he would stop at nothing to expose the lies and reclaim his life. Because now it wasn't just about money or power, it was about survival. The van rattled down a forgotten road on the outskirts of the city, its headlights cutting through thick fog. Charles stared out the window, mind swirling with the revelations Marcus had shared. A secret cabal, hidden evidence, a web of betrayal that stretched far beyond his family's mansion. Anna sat beside him, silent but steady, her hand resting gently on his knee. They both knew their lives had changed forever. Marcus finally broke the silence. We have to get inside first, he said grimly. The place where they keep the files is guarded by the cabal's most loyal men, armed and ruthless. Charles clenched his fists. We don't have a choice. If we want justice, we have to risk everything. The van came to a stop in front of an old warehouse, abandoned and looming in the darkness like a beast waiting to be tamed. Marcus killed the engine. This is it, he whispered. We move fast and quiet. They climbed out, hearts pounding in the silence. Charles felt the cold bite of fear, but beneath it, a fierce fire, the need to fight back. They slipped through a broken side door, the smell of rust and decay thick in the air. Inside, shadows danced against the cracked concrete walls. Marcus led them to a narrow staircase descending into the basement. Here's where they keep the evidence, he said. Charles's pulse quickened. If they could get those files, they could bring down the cabal and expose Daniel's betrayal once and for all. But danger lurked in every corner. Suddenly, a noise echoed from above. Heavy footsteps. Marcus froze. We've been spotted, he hissed. Charles gripped Anna's hand. Stay close. They hurried down the stairs into the basement, the air thick and cold. A faint light flickered at the end of the hall. They approached carefully. In a small room, rows of filing cabinets stood, dust-covered but intact. Marcus immediately began searching, pulling open drawers, rifling through papers. Minutes passed like hours, then Marcus's voice broke the silence. Here it is. He held up a thick folder labeled Confidential Cabal Operations. Charles grabbed it, scanning the first page. Names, dates, transactions, proof of bribery, blackmail, even murder. His stomach churned. This was the proof he needed. But before they could celebrate, a shadow moved in the doorway. A tall figure stepped. Inside, face obscured by darkness. "Well, well," the voice sneered. "I should have known you'd come sniffing around." Charles raised his pistol. The figure laughed coldly. "Do you really think you can stop us with that?" A fierce struggle erupted. Charles fought with desperation, adrenaline fueling every move. Anna screamed as the stranger lunged toward Marcus. But then the lights flickered on, revealing not one attacker but 5 armed men. They were trapped. Marcus shoved Charles toward a side exit. "Go! Get out! I'll hold them off!" Charles hesitated, but nodded. He grabbed Anna's hand, racing through the maze of corridors. Shots rang out behind them. Their hearts pounded in unison as they burst out into the night. They didn't stop running, until the warehouse was a distant shadow behind them. Charles collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. Anna's eyes were wide with fear. "We have the files," Charles said, holding the folder tightly. "But Marcus, we have to." "Find him," Anna said urgently. Charles shook his head. "We don't even know if he's alive." As sirens echoed closer, Charles made a silent vow. No matter the cost, he would uncover the cabal's secrets. He would bring justice for his family, and he would survive, because now there was no turning back. Charles sat alone in the small, rented apartment, the weight of the evidence folder heavy in his lap. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the storm brewing beneath its polished surface. Days had passed since the warehouse raid. Marcus was missing. Anna's hope for his survival flickered faintly, but Charles felt the crushing truth. Marcus might be gone, yet the files they held were a lifeline. Names, transactions, secrets, enough to topple the cabal's empire. But Charles also knew one brutal fact. Exposing the cabal meant risking everything: his wealth, his safety, even his life. He glanced at Anna across the room. She had been his rock, fierce and determined. "I'm scared, Charles," she admitted softly. "But I know we have to do this." Charles nodded. "We have to finish what Marcus started." They planned their next move carefully, sharing the evidence with a trusted investigative journalist, someone immune to the cabal's reach. A few hours later they met with Maya, a fearless reporter known for unearthing corruption. Maya's eyes widened as Charles handed over the files. "This is explosive," she said. "But it's dangerous. They'll come after you." Charles looked at Anna. "We're ready." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Maya's articles revealed the cabal's crimes one by one. The city erupted in shock. Police investigations launched. Powerful figures resigned or disappeared, but the cabal fought back viciously. Threats, sabotage, even attacks. Charles and Anna faced it all together, their bond unbreakable. One cold evening, a knock came at their door. Charles opened it to find Marcus, battered but alive. "I escaped," Marcus whispered, tears in his eyes. "They want to silence us all." Relief flooded through Charles. "We're almost there," Anna said firmly. "This ends now." With public pressure mounting and the cabal exposed, arrests followed. Daniel's name surfaced, the man Charles once trusted, now revealed as a puppet of the cabal. In a final confrontation, Charles met Daniel in a courtroom. Daniel's smug smile faltered as evidence was laid bare. "Why?" Charles asked quietly. Daniel shrugged. "Power, survival. It's all the same." Charles felt a surge of sorrow and anger, but as Daniel was led away in handcuffs, Charles realized something deeper. He had lost much: his trust, his innocence, but he had gained something priceless: truth and freedom. In the quiet, after the storm, Charles stood on the steps of the courthouse, Anna by his side. He looked out at the city, now waking to a new dawn. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who you really are. And for Charles, The millionaire who had posed as a beggar to uncover the truth. That lesson was worth everything. The end.